Welcome to yet another session of MS Talks. Today, we are going to be talking about a very interesting initiative that we at MS Events are organizing called the Arab Green Summit, or TAGS as we call it fondly. Climate change is defying nature's eternal principles and warming our planet. Nations are racing against time to reach the goals of Paris Climate Deal and transition to net zero by 2050. The deadline set to prevent the Earth from warming beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius by the turn of this century. Climate risk is arguably the greatest risk facing humanity. Global economies are forced to take drastic actions while trying to strike a balance between sustainability and economic and social priorities. These challenges have led to important conversations involving governments, international organizations, and business leaders, which in turn has led to a huge paradigm shift. The Arab Green Summit brings together the stakeholders across the Arab region to discuss and discover the latest practices and creative solutions, serving as a platform for climate champions to discuss, innovate, collaborate, and set the path for climate action through mitigation and adaptation. Today, to have a very interesting discussion, we have our conference chairman, Dr. Jagannathan, who is a senior advisor within the Energy, Sustainability, ESG, and Climate Action. Dr. Jagannathan is well known in the industry as an expert on the topics of energy, sustainability, and climate action, and has more than 25 years of professional experience in this domain. He specializes in providing strategic advice on sustainability and climate action, and further reinforces by designing and developing bespoke solutions to help stakeholders meet their goals and climate ambitions. As sustainability head at Turkey's, Dr. Jagannathan was involved with designing, developing, and administering major policy tools and regulations surrounding built environments and has further achieved new heights in driving energy efficiency. Further joining us, we have Mr. Neil Stewart. Neil is the Value Reporting Foundation's New York-based Director of Corporate Outreach, advancing awareness of the SASB Standards and the International Integrated Reporting Framework, and helping companies worldwide with implementation. Neil brings more than 25 years of experience in and around investor relations and corporate governance. Previously at Citigroup as VP IR advisory on the ADR team, helping non-US issuers develop IR and ESG strategies. Neil is a board member of NIRI New York, the New York chapter of the National Investor Relations Institute. Over to you, Dr. Jagan and Neil. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pritka, for the lovely introduction. Morning, Neil. How are things in New York City?
Doing well, thank you.
So, thanks for joining us, Neil. Obviously, my first question to you is going to be around the Arab Green Summit, or the TAGS that we fondly call it. So, this is a climate-themed and sector-focused summit. In terms of the sectors, in terms of the segments, and in terms of the topics and speaker lineup, what are your first thoughts on the Arab Green Summit to be held in Dubai, Neil?
Well, you know, Dr. Jagan, I reflect on where we are now in our progress on climate action, and looking back, COP21 in Paris in 2015, that really marked a year of planning, of goal setting. And COP26 was meant to mark a year of action. It was delayed, unfortunately, by COVID. But when COP26 came in Glasgow in November of 2021, it really showed that it was going to be a year of action. It marked the beginning of a year of action. And I think the Arab Green Summit is a really good example of this, of starting to get the discussions underway to trigger real change, real action. I was very impressed to see the agenda and to see how it really brings together business, government, finance, NGOs, and academics. You're bringing together scientists, engineers, and financiers, and of course, standard setters like the Value Reporting Foundation. I think that this is really showing how the Arab region can begin to consider the type of collaborations, the types of initiatives, and the types of ideas that are really going to be needed to help us make the transition towards a carbon neutral world.
Thank you so much. That's really nice to hear from you. Moving forward to the to ESG as such, ESG also known as also referred to as non-financial disclosures. This is slowly getting into the mainstream, quite matured in your country, US, UK, EU, and parts of Asia as well, Japan and Singapore and New Zealand. And it is also mandated, it's going to be mandated to some extent by DFM and Abu Dhabi as well for listed companies. But when it comes to climate action, we know that it requires the journey to be with all the participants, including SMEs, who are a significant part of the economy. But they are not listed. But from your point of view, how do we actually encourage them and motivate them to be a part of ESG reporting, notwithstanding their inherent barriers such as lack of awareness or lack of mandates or lack of resources?
So the most important thing is that when we think about ESG, this is not just about transparency or reporting or somehow doing good or helping the environment or society. This is about business performance. ESG issues, ESG risks are business risks. And whether it's the board of directors thinking about risk oversight, management thinking about opportunities in terms of strategy, or employees in terms of thinking about their contributions to the business, the ESG factors have become incredibly important to overall corporate performance. This is really where the SASB standards are focused on. What are those management levers? Where can management actually make a difference in terms of the supply chain, in terms of products, the distribution channels, and of course, coming back to emissions and use of energy, perhaps some of the most important. But there's so many different ways that that businesses now can really seek not just a sustainable business, but a better performing business through ESG.
All right. SASB, as we know it, is quite a sector-focused and investment-targeted standard, and that has also been quite well adopted in several parts of the world. And for the simple reason that it is quite straightforward, it is cost-effective to implement, and it is also evidence-backed. Now, from your experience, how do you see SASB or ESG in general and SASB in particular pitching itself and growing in a region, in MENA region in general and UAE in particular? Any thoughts on that?
Well, as you point out, the SASB standards are industry specific, which allows for comparability. And that's what it came from. That came from the demand of investors. The SASB standards really grew out of market demand. Investors, as they began integrating ESG across their portfolios, they needed that decision useful ESG data. And to be decision useful, you have to have that industry specific aspect, because ESG issues are simply not one size fits all. Again, going back to my previous remark, it might be for some companies, it might be more about the supply chain. Others, it might be about products. Others, it might be about their emissions. So you need that industry specific element. Now, what we've seen in the decade since the SASB standards began to be created is that investors worldwide have really coalesced around the SASB standards for industry-specific ESG data and the TCFD recommendations for climate risk. This is where investors are focused, and that's because both SASB standards and the TCFD are focused on financial materiality. Now, this is now evolving. We are now on the precipice of a tremendous evolution in terms of ESG reporting, and that is the creation of the International Sustainability Standards Board by the IFRS Foundation. That will bring the SASB standards and the TCFD recommendations, as well as the other standards and frameworks focused on the financial community. It will bring them together to provide a new, very clear global baseline to allow companies and investors to identify and communicate around ESG performance.
That's a very good point that you brought in, Neil, in the universal standard that is currently under development and we would see perhaps few years down the line. But till such time, we are going to have GRI, SASB, TCFD, then CDP, UN SDGs, and so many standards and frameworks that are going to be all around. And it's when too many frameworks come together in too short a time, and there is a pressure from the regulators as well as the investment community for ESG regulation, ESG disclosure, we cannot avoid greenwashing finding its way. So it's going to be there, and it happens quite bad, and it is our responsibility to discourage it, if not decimate it. So what are your thoughts on greenwashing that we are eventually going to face all across the world?
Well, I think that the standardization that we're seeing is really the antidote to greenwashing. When you have clear standards with the metrics that companies and investors agree upon, that allow for comparability between companies and completeness of reporting, for business, there's really no hiding. Same for investors. There's no hiding poor performance in terms of climate action or, for example, incomplete disclosure. And that's where I think we're getting to a maturity in terms of the standards, but also the data. One of the biggest challenges for companies, especially small and medium enterprises, is gathering that data, being able to get reliable data from across the organization, and then be able to have the processes and controls around it that make it genuinely decision useful for the board, for management, for investors. I think that as we move towards this common language that we can all communicate and agree upon, then we get away from greenwashing. Investors now have the capacity to harvest and analyze an enormous amount of data. Companies are providing that data, and so we're getting to the point now where really we are able to clearly see the good performers and identify the bad performers.
I think that's a good way of putting it, and we all want to look at it with optimism that we'll have credible data in due course. Neil, you are going to be talking at the Arab Green Summit. And as SASB's business outreach director, you definitely have some message. And what's going to be your focus on the summit in terms of the message, or what's going to be your narrative in driving the community towards net zero through the prism of tags in this region? What can the delegates look forward to from Neil?
Well, the most important thing, as you pointed out, the number of standards and frameworks make it quite difficult for companies. There's a lot of competing demands. So the main message that I want to get across is that it is simplifying. The landscape is boiling down and getting much clearer and simplified with the creation of the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board. It will create a global baseline for companies and investors to communicate around ESG performance, a global baseline. So that will it can still have regional building blocks on top of it, whether that's in the Arab region or in Europe or in Southern Africa, but there will be a global baseline we can all agree upon. The second aspect I want to make very clear is that in the meantime, while that is being established, do not stop the momentum that we have around SASB standards, TCFD, integrated reporting. They are still extremely important as we move through this evolution, and the work done now will carry forward into the ISSB. And then the third and last point is to engage with the standard setting process. Many companies have this around accounting standards. Now it's time to get the machinery in motion to engage and contribute to ESG accounting standards and disclosure standards. So respond to the consultations of the ISSB, have input, whether it's directly through your company or through the industry associations that you're a part of. So those are the main points that I want to get across to companies in order to keep this momentum going towards genuinely making a difference in the world.
Okay. Neil, for the first time, we are seeing the greatest confluence of science, engineering, and finance community, thanks to COP. Now, we need engineering community for the technology and technological advancements to reach net zero. And we need financing community as well for investment and driving them. But through COP, thanks to COP26, we are now seeing them together through ESG, connected by the thread of climate action. Does it bring, how do you see the confluence? Now it's no longer investment community separate and engineers separate, but they are somehow bound together with this common thread. How do you see this? To me, it is exciting, scary as well, but how do you find that?
I agree. It's very exciting. This notion of really bringing those different sides together and reducing those silos. So you begin to see that we have the institutional framework, we have the commitment to just transition, and that means a focus on human capital as well as climate issues. We have the technologists and the scientists and the academics bringing digital technological excellence to these challenges. So I think that the Arab Green Summit really is going to be an important occasion, a milestone for the region.
One last question, Neil. Through the prism of tax, what message would you like to deliver to us on the summit?
Well, I think that you have heard my note of optimism. I am a believer that we can make we can really make change, and that business can be a force for change. Business, finance can help move the world in the right direction. So I think that that message of optimism is the main one that I want to bring. We can have hope, and that will give us additional impetus towards action.
Thank you so much, Neil. It was great speaking to you. We are excited with the event, and I look forward to seeing you at TAX.
Thank you, Dr. Jagan.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Jagan and Neil. It was great to hear all these insights from you, and we look forward to seeing you at TAGS. Thank you.